Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do a deep dive first look at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol from Princeps Games. In this game you get to fight as either the Japanese or the Russian forces in this 1939 border clash over disputed territory between Japanese-occupied Manchuria and Russian Mongolia. This video, by the way, is the first video in a three-part sponsored video series by Princeps Games. First, we're going to do a first look video. The next, we're going to do an overview of gameplay. We're going to finish with a full after-action report of the 8-turn main scenario. And some good news attached to this, we are going to be giving away a copy of the Battle of Khalkhin Gol to one lucky winner. Details will be at the end of the video. One caveat, this is an offer that's only good for people who live in the contiguous US 48 states. Sorry to our international viewers. One quick caveat before we start, this is a prototype version. A number of things you'll notice are not final version, and there will be changes. So things can change between the version we're looking at right now and the final printed version. It's also worth mentioning that this is the third war game from Princeps Games. The first, March on the Drina, covers Serbia in World War I, and the second, Freezing Inferno, covers the Soviet-Finnish conflict at the beginning of World War II. Lastly, all the answers you'll need to enter the giveaway at the end of this video are contained within this video, so pay attention. And with that, let's get started. First up, I want to say I love the box art here. I think the artistic vision on this is really cool. It just pulls you kind of into the game, and it's just a really nice vision to it. The same thing as with Freezing Inferno. I love the box art for that too. This Battle of Khalkhin Gol covers the Soviet-Japanese conflict from the early parts of July, specifically July 2nd to August 31st, 1939. And as we take a look, there's one scenario in this game, and kind of factors that will be playing into the replayability is there are a series of event decks, and only one of 3 possible event cards is going to come up at the beginning of each turn. So you're going to get some variety there. Also, by the way, by the nature of the setup that's used in the game, the setup is going to be very different each time you play. Lastly, there are going to be different general configurations in terms of which generals are going to lead your army. So I feel like even though there is one scenario here, there's a number of elements that are layered in that are going to help with the replayability. So it's not going to be something I think you play once and then say, yeah, kind of done with that. I think there's a lot of chances to dig into different strategies, and the event cards creating some variation as well. With regards to the size and scope of the game, the units are somewhat abstract, so they don't represent specific historical units that were at the battle, but I'm going to guess that it's probably battalion regiment level unit size. And our map scale, it doesn't list the map scale here, but Princeps Games has mentioned that roughly 50 kilometers across in terms of the whole scope of the map. So you get an idea of kind of high tactical level, low operational level game that you're going to be working with in this 2-month conflict. And with that, let's jump in and take a look at what's inside. Let's start with the rules, and again, a reminder, this is a prototype, right? This is just a Word document that I printed out on my color documents. Very much a work in progress, so this is going to be much polished up with more graphics and look a lot better in the final version there. So take all that, this with a grain of salt in what we're looking at it. But I did want to show it just to give you an idea of complexity quickly. There's about 27 pages at this print size and this font size and stuff like that. It is very familiar. If you've played Freezing Inferno, you're going to find a lot of the rules familiar, and a lot of the rules are going to say, oh yeah, I remember that from Freezing Inferno. So the system itself has been ported over, and however, having said that, the air system in this game is completely different. And one of the things I really like about Princeps Games is they add a lot of just kind of really neat, innovative twists to their design. And I think the air combat system, which is really, there's 3 different levels, and we'll talk about it as we get into the player aids, 3 different levels, but that advanced level is really its own mini game, which is something that didn't exist in Freezing Inferno, so that's very different. So it's not like you're going to be playing Freezing Inferno with the exact same mechanics, but there's probably like a 70% overlap, I would say, between Freezing Inferno and Khalkhin Gol. So learning's going to be fast, but it's going to be different enough gameplay that it's going to feel different. In terms of complexity, I would give this game a 3 out of 10 based on what I'm seeing. I've read through the rules now, and I really didn't run into any issues. It's all pretty straightforward. It's not an extraordinarily complex game. I mean, there's a lot of gameplay elements here, but it's just not. However, having said that, I would say that 3.5 would be the complexity if you add in the advanced combat system instead of the very basic combat system. So I think it's got a really nice sweet spot for complexity. I could see you bringing this game and using it to kind of teach new people about war games too. I think it could, it's probably a high introductory game, but I think it could work as an introductory war game too. Last thing I want to talk about as we look at the rules here is the solo possibilities for play. There are a few elements, hidden units, we'll talk a little bit about those, air combat, and then the starting setup build-up sequence that really have to be adjusted for in solitaire play, and I think all of those have ways that they'll be able to work around, so I don't think any of those are really going to cause issue. And in the back of the rules here, there is a solo mode guidance, and there's a USSR bot sequence, and there is a Japan bot sequence. So bot is, I think, a little bit of an overstatement here. I would say more like guidance for solo play, because it's not going to move all your units for you. It's going to give you objectives that you're supposed to carry out with that side, and then you as the player are going to have to decide what that means and move the unit to those specific places. So it's more like a solo guide for it. But I think with all of this in mind, and the fact that it's going to be really easy to adjust based on this guide and the bot sequence for those elements where it's really some deception between two players, I'm going to give this a solitaire estimate of a 6 out of 10. Let's jump in now and take a look at the counters. There are a lot of them, and we'll see here are the Russian counters, literal a treasure chest full of them. This storage system I think will slightly change. This is again prototype storage version, so don't judge the quality of the storage system based on these counters. But they're basically the basic combat units. I'll show them here on the side too. We've got armor, infantry, cavalry in the game here, and then artillery as well. And the way they work, the reason why there is literally a bucket full of these, is that each hex can hold one type of a unit, and you can have as many as 5 counters in a single hex. Now, the values in the top left is the attack value, top right is the defense value. And how this works in the game is basically the same as it was in Freezing Inferno. If I have 1 counter there, it has a strength of 1. So the number of counters in a hex represents its strength, and to that you add this attack value or defense value. So 1 single armored unit in a hex would have a value of 5. If we add 2 more counters, it has a strength of 3, because there's 3 counters in the hex, plus its attack value of 4, gives us a strength of 7. And what this allows you to do is have a kind of a system of gradual depletion and gradual reinforcement. So as units are taking casualties, they're losing units off their stack. And then as you're building in reinforcements, because there's an entire supply and political point system, much like that of Freezing Inferno, that's going to allow you to replenish your units by rebuilding the stacks at certain points in the game. So that's basically how those units work there. And we can see those are the Russian ones. Let's take a look now. I think the Japanese ones are over here. And yeah, here we go. So nice white and red, good units, some Japanese infantry units. We can see attack of 2, defense of 3, and they work the same way in terms of all the unit types. Then we have a few markers here. Again, this is definitely a prototype, so don't panic. Okay. And these are the unit oops, these are the Russian units, sorry. Where's the box here? Here we go. These are the unit markers. So no offense on the next turn. This is a combat result that knocks the unit out basically for a turn. It's kind of stunning it, really putting it out of action and disruption. Control markers for the victory point hexes. We'll talk about those as we look at the map. And there is a supply system as well. Units can be out of supply. Here's the out of supply markers for theirs. You also have a bridge building function. As we'll look on the map, the Khalkhin Gol River is impassable, but there is the capacity to build bridges across it too. So there are some conditions why you can kind of change the scope of the battlefield by doing a river crossing. Lastly, there are what are called political points in the game. And it's basically money to a certain degree in terms of what the units represent. But these political points, you gain them by holding victory point conditions. That gives you a number of replenishment and supplies as you go through the campaign. And you use these to basically act out where you can change dice rolls. There's espionage and deception system in the game, as well as replenish your lost units and build new ones. So that's a quick look at all of the counters here. I want to take a moment and talk about the dice. Most of the combat results in the game are using a D8, a 1D8. And here we have an 8-sided die that you can use in the game to get your results, which gives an equal likelihood a 1 comes up as a 4 comes up. However, if you want to mitigate extreme results, you have a couple of optional 20-sided dice that you can use that only have the numbers 1 to 8 on them. However, you'll notice this red die, it only has 2 1s instead of like 3 or 4 1s, 3 1s. And so that only gives you a 10% chance that your extreme value is going to come out. Likewise, only 2 8s on this die. This die only has 1 1 on it and 1 8 on it. So there's only a 5% chance that a 1 or an 8 is going to come up. And most of your values, we can see 3 chances of a 5, are skewed around that middle range. So it gives you less variation in your 1d8 dice rolls. And you can play with any one of these 3 that you want. So I really like this, a really cool system, a really way to mitigate that. You know, you have a really strong attack and then you roll a 1 more often than not and luck really gets you. It kind of balances out to a degree, you would think, the luck factor. There's also a 12-sided die that's used in some of the functions in the game as well. Let's take a look at our cards. There are 4 different types here. We've got some leaders. I love the artwork on these. These are just both the backs and the fronts, the Japanese leaders here and the Russian units. I love the color palette they've chosen to use with the cards and things. Some of them here are historical figures. Some of them, I'm not sure if these will be replaced or these are just kind of generic leaders. But each leader has an ability level and a strength. So we can see 2 and 3 down here, 3 and then 4. And what's really neat, again, kind of getting at that idea of innovation behind these leaders, how the leaders function in the game is that they're attached to a unit and they're going to function as the leader of that particular unit. But if a leader, for example, has a value of 4, that means the floor on the die roll, the 1d8 in combat, is a 4. So if here Stern is leading his unit into battle, no matter what you roll, if you roll a 1, 2, 3, it's always going to be at least a 4. So it creates kind of a less chance that you're going to have poor results based on their leadership. And the leadership ranges are from 2, 3, or 4. So your weaker leaders are at 2. They're going to mitigate, they're going to change all the 1s to 2s. And then the 4s, of course, are going to change 1, 2s, and 3s to 4s. So what a cool idea for a way. I haven't seen leadership expressed in a game that way before. Here we have the Japanese leaders. That was just a really clever way to do that. And in each game, you're going to have 3 leaders that total up to 9 points. So you can have a 3 3s or 2 3 4, and they command different types as well, so you're going to be able to kind of mix and match for different battles. So again, kind of creating a little subtle variation in gameplay each time you play by you having different leader sets if you would like. Speaking of variation in gameplay, we also have an event deck. You'll notice that they're numbered up the top. These represent the turns that come into play. These are mixed up right now, but for example, we have 3 for each turn. So there, if we look through, there are going to be 3 6s. Of course, I can't find it now, but you get the idea. Here's 2 of the 3 6s, and you're going to pick 1 for each game. And then on the 6th turn, this event plays, and the other 2 6s aren't used at all. And again, I really like the design of these. I mean, these are really fresh, cool design in this. And it's got a little historical flavor text here, and then it's got the impact upon the game in that turn. So in turn 6 here, 1 Japanese infantry unit has -2 movement power. That's a pretty minor one there too, I would suppose, but they're not earth-shattering, some of these. 1 Soviet infantry unit is immune to the die roll 8 result. If the Japanese player rolls an 8, it counts as a 7. Interesting. So not overly stated. They seem a little bit subtle in some cases like that, but again, you're going to get an entire different set of events each time you play the game. Let's take a look at our air cards now. These are for the advanced game. So there is a basic game, advanced game, and then there's kind of advanced game plus a couple of optional rules. These are some cards that can be put into play. Again, we've got, I think, 8 or so, 1 for each turn for each side. And these are cards that you can play, I believe, if you've won air superiority, you get additionally to play this card in your turn. So if your bomber gets hit by enemy AFR, you can re-roll the opponent's die for 1 time. 1 enemy anti-aircraft gun must use the blue D20 die. So lots of different ways in here that these kind of come into play, but they're little ways that you can kind of influence the air battle and the air results and the air combat in the game. Now, these last 2 decks of cards here, there are 9 cards, starting with 0, going all the way up to number 8. And basically, this is for that intermediate air superiority battle game that happens each turn. And there's a process. We'll kind of look through it more in the next video, the overview video. But what happens is at the beginning of each turn, you're going to play a card depending on how much you want to put into your efforts to gain air superiority, with in mind that once you use a card, it's discarded and removed for the game. So you have to kind of think about when you want to play your highest 8. And there also is a rebidding war that once per game, you've got 9 cards, you can play an extra card to kind of influence that particular air superiority. So it's kind of a cat and mouse, kind of trying to outthink your opponent type of game in terms of trying to figure out how you're going to use these cards to gain air superiority in critical turns. So basically you'd match up the units here, like a 9 against a 5, and then there's a bunch of other factors that come into play. So even if you're just outmatched, it doesn't mean you lose. It means it's going to vary depending upon your fighters and your airbase numbers and things like that too. So these are the 2 pads that talking about some of the variety in play. These are what are used for the setup conditions. If you played Freezing Inferno, you're familiar with this type of a system. But basically, before the game starts, this is a Japanese one, this is the Russian one, you're going to jot down where the different types of units are. And all the units are going to start at full strength, so 5-stack piles. You put like I up here, A up here, and things like that. And there are some restrictions on where you can put units and where you can't put units. And then you're going to show this sheet and basically set up the board based on how you put these sheets into place. And this is also where you're going to designate 3 hidden units on these sheets that you're going to expose as an enemy unit moves into range of those 3 units. There is a variation on this where you can alternate setup. So Japanese player puts down a stack, then the Russian player puts down a stack, Japanese player puts down a stack, Russian player puts down a stack. And one of the things I think, with solitaire play is you can have some default ones, or maybe even create like 4 or 5 of these and then just pick one randomly to start out the game if you're playing solitaire. So lots of ways I think you can kind of play around with these if you're thinking about playing the game solitaire to create some variety in gameplay. But again, as you can see, each game using that type of system, each game is going to be different depending upon what where you're emphasizing your push and where you're going to hold your defense and where your opponent is too. All right, let's take a look at our player aids. First, there is weather modeled in the game: fog, wind, rain, and clear. Then we have our 2 airbase player aids here too. And this is where that entire mini game happens with air superiority, if you're playing the advanced version, if you would, of the air superiority battle. And how it works is roughly there are 2 stages to it. The first stage is determining which side has air superiority in a turn. And how you do that is you secretly pick one of those 0 to 8 cards, with the caveat that once you use it, it's out of the game. So you're going to pick one of those 0 to 8. You're going to add your fighter total to that, and that's going to give you a column down here to roll on. A little bit of modifiers in here too. That's going to give you a final number on that 1d8, and you compare those numbers. Whoever has the higher number wins air superiority, with the caveat that each side has an option to play an additional card. Depends on who's gone first with the initiative and stuff like that. So it's a little bit nuanced, but that's the rough idea, is that there's going to be this fighters card die roll battle to determine who has air superiority. And then if you win air superiority, you can attack the other side's airbase strength, which is up here, and reduce it as you go along. So this is the strength and the number, kind of the number of total capacity you can have on your air bases. So it's roughly an abstract way to keep track of air strength in the region as well. You can also attack enemy supply lines, which removes their political points, which is the unit, the value, the money, if you would, the currency that you use to replenish units. Or you could use it more tactically in a +1 modifier to attack, or gain like an espionage and kind of deception token, probably signifying like scouting actions. And we'll take more a look at this as we do the gameplay overview and dig into the campaign and stuff like that. So we'll see how it plays. If it's a little confusing now, don't worry about it. It's actually, once you get it, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. There's also espionage and deception modeled in the game too, and you can spend your political points to advance these up the track. This gives you, espionage gives you the option to reroll dice, and deception gives you the option to pull away a unit that's been attacked if you want to pull away a defensive unit before the actual attack goes off. Then we have a more standard player aid here with the terrain cost, list of abbreviation, some of the terrain attack modifiers, unit characteristics, and the sequence of play up here. Very detailed sequence of play, so I think it would be good for helping to play the game accurately. Lastly, combat results table. Combats are done by the variance on the numbers, so it's not necessarily an odds calculation, but we'll see how this works as we go through. And then you're rolling an 8-sided die with die roll modifiers to get various results on the table here. So fairly standard, except the odds element is done by more a ratio of strength than anything else. So there are 2 versions of the map in the game. There's a map on each side of the mounted board here, and 34 by 36 inches across. Each hex here is 1 inch across. Units again are 3/4 of an inch. So a nice big wide playing surface. I think it's going to be easy to manipulate with fingers and things like that. Now in the top right hand side here, we've got the turn markers 1 to 8, and then on the left hand side coming all the way down here up to 50, we've got those political point markers. And you earn political point markers by basically controlling your cities. They're going to give you a certain amount of political points per turn based on the value of the victory point hex there. And then as you capture enemy ones, you're going to deny them political points kind of generated, and you're going to be adding a little bit to your pool. So the amount of political points you're going to have in the game is going to sway with the idea of you want to try to capture the enemy control points in order to be able to kind of swing those political point production in your favor. Strategically, we can see the Japanese are going to start up here. These yellow flagged checkpoints are there home Czech bases. They're kind of controlled bases. The red ones over here are the Russian ones. Then we have the contested area, which is basically the battle of the Russians said that their control of this area extended a certain degree past the Khalkhin Gol River. The Japanese disagreed with that and said the Japanese territory went up to the Khalkhin Gol River. So there's this disputed territory in between. This is represented by these white flagged checkpoints, and that's what you're fighting for. The Russians have to take control of a certain number of those without losing theirs, and if that happens, they win the game. If the Japanese deny that victory condition, they win the game. Alternative victory conditions, Nomonhan up here is the Japanese home base. If the Russians control that, it's an immediate Russian victory. And Tamsak Bulak down here is the Russian-controlled main base. If the Japanese control that, then it's a Japanese victory. I want to zoom in and show a little bit more of the artwork of the map here. I really like the cards. I really like the box. I like the components. I like the player aids and the counters and things. I'm much more neutral on the map. I think, again, it's very functional. It's clear what is what. But it doesn't quite pull me into 1939 like the rest of the components would be. I do want to see what it looks like with all the counters and things set up on it too. And there's a second side. We'll take a look at that. But I think I'm going to play with this side. I think I prefer this side over the two. Here is the alternate map. So this is the second side of the map. In terms of functionality, everything is identical. Same turn keepers, same political points markers over here, same checkpoints and victory point signs and everything. So its only difference is the artistic vision. This has got a very unique retro feel to it. This is such a simple map. I mean, it's very, very functional and clear and it provides a lot of clarity for what types of terrain there are and stuff like that. And it's got kind of again, it feels like it's a kind of a throwback map in many ways. I think, again, going back to that idea of pulling me into 1939, I think I prefer the previous side rather than this one, although I am kind of curious to see what the counters look like on the map here too. It's got a very, I think, a unique vision here for this one, but I do think I prefer the other side in terms of pulling me back into the era a little bit more. There we have it, a first look at Battle of Khalkhin Gol from Princeps Games. There's one thing for us left to address though, that is, how do you win a copy of the game? To enter into the drawing to see who gets a winner of the game shipped out to them, what you want to do in the form, in the video description, there is a link to a Google form. I'll probably make the first post underneath here to the first comment. We'll have a link to it as well. You want to click on that form, open it up, and there's going to be 3 questions about this, the Battle of Khalkhin Gol game. All of the answers to the questions are somewhere in this video, so check your notes or go back and look at the video until you find them. It shouldn't be too hard to find them. I think you'll be able to do it pretty quickly. I do need to, in order to limit entries to 1 per person, I do need to collect email addresses from people, so you'll be asked for that. Those email addresses not be given away and shared or sold or anything like that. I don't want people's emails. They'll only be used for the purposes of giving away this game. Once the game is given away, those will be destroyed. The second thing about this is that this is only good for people living in the contiguous 48 U.S. states. So you have to be a resident of the 48 lower U.S. states there. The third thing, another thing, is that we'll be announcing the winner of this competition in the 3rd video in this series. So we'll do a gameplay overview next. Then we're going to do an after-action report for the 3rd video. That's when we're going to show, kind of work through a whole 8-turn scenario. That's where we'll be announcing the winner, so be sure to check that video to see if you have won. Lastly, once the 2nd video, the game overview, is done, I'll put a link to it right there, and you can check that out. Be happy to answer any questions. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.